All right, so we'll just jump right in.
Mm-hmm.
As we were just kind of discussing on the walk over to your car, the show is all about values. So what are your values in the context of your story?
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly interested in artists, entrepreneurs, athletes. You're a high-level athlete, a javelin thrower.
Yeah, javelin thrower. Sometimes I like to screw with people and say javelineer.
Javelinier, I like that.
Yeah, it's like a musketeer, but...
Yeah. And you're Olympian.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about that, like just diving right in. When did you get into javelin and how did you end up as an Olympic athlete? Like, were you drawn to javelin specifically because you're really good at it? Was it something you were mentally attracted to, or how'd that all come into?
Yeah, I like to say I chose me, or sorry,
Yeah.
javelin chose me,
Mm-hmm.
and then I chose javelin back.
Yeah.
And that's really what happens sometimes. I played softball for a long time. I was a pitcher,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had a really good hip.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what pitching is. It's all
Mm-hmm.
legs. And javelin is all legs as well. And it really translates super, super well to understanding how to create whip and throwing things with your
Yeah.
body. So I was in grade 8 gym class, and I was the only kid in the class who didn't hit themselves in the back of the head or flip the javelin. And they're like, you, come throw javelin. I thought, sure, why not? So that was the start of it. And then very soon after, I was national champion in grade 10. And that was just kind of messing around with it for 2 months a year in high school.
Yeah.
And so it chose me. I was already prepared for it,
Mhm.
but then javelin chose me.
Yeah.
And then when I wanted to make the Olympics, it was 2011 when I really made the decision to stop training in Vancouver, put school on hold, and be really serious. And I moved to Lethbridge, where instead of training 5 or 6 times a week, I trained 10 times a week. And it was double sessions every single session between a throw and a lift. Sometimes we'd have sprint, sometimes we'd have tempo and other things on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was this full dive into choosing to want to be an Olympian. And I knew that when you make that choice, it's not a sacrifice, it's that something is such a hard hell yes that everything else that doesn't align with that becomes a very obvious no.
Yeah.
And it's a fun game to see what actually aligns with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Have there been other things in your life that kind of chose you like that?
I mean, nothing
Prominently?
chooses you as much as that. You know, that was my hobby, that was my job, that was how I spent my spare time, that was how I enjoyed doing anything. That was my favorite thing to do. And I think I'm very much like that in general, where I like to experience something to an incredible depth.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm kind of in this place of, okay, I have all this space to figure out how I want to spend my time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm enjoying spending time trying different things, but I know that once I get decently good at one thing, something's going to stand out to me as something that brings me joy.
Yeah.
And that'll be the thing that I dive into and drop other things later. So I think life is an ebb and flow like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you can continue to spread your life out and experience many things in less depth. And that's a perfectly enjoyable way to spend your life.
Mm-hmm.
But for some people, I think it's like, sometimes we don't realize the value of having a deep knowledge of some aspect of being human.
Yeah. So when you're deep into something, and just sticking with the javelin, like what is that like? Like you're training twice a day, but like are all your friends from the javelin world, or are all your meals catered to your training routine? Wait,
what point in time are we asking about?
Like when you're for your javelin career, and
it's
to clarify,
changed. That's a long career.
Yeah, so it's and actually let's touch on that. So you're recently retired,
yes,
correct? Yeah. Is this your first Olympics that you haven't done?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is I made the last 3 Olympics, and so I've been very full time pursuing javelin and high performance since 2011.
Gotcha.
Like
so
that was everything.
Yeah. So it's a dozen years, something like that.
Yeah.
And so how did your in-depth relationship with javelin change over the course of the 12 years? What was it like in the beginning, and then as you became sort of a more savvy veteran, how did that change?
Yeah, I think it was a very interesting evolution in the way that at first it was everything physical became about javelin. And so I was only thinking about my body. So I was just prioritizing sleep. I was prioritizing my meals. I was prioritizing training really hard and going for big numbers in the gym. I was trying like my all-out energy. Like I would be physically exhausted at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it got me there, and it was really good. But then the second time around it became very different. And it was about, okay, what is the best way that I can do this very efficiently? What is actually taking care of moving the needle forward? And it wasn't just throw things at the wall and see what sticks. It was be specific about how you spend your time, because then you can do more things and get more return on investment. It's like the whole Pareto's Law, 80-20 principle. It's what's the 20% that gives you the 80% of the work? And making sure that you're not leaving anything untouched or untapped because you're spending too much time trying to fill up this other part of percentage that just takes way more energy. And that was the second one. And that's when you kind of figure out how much time you spend with your friends, how much time you actually spend lifting, how much time you actually need for downtime, how much time you need for fun. And then after that, it was about making it perfect. And it was like this weird thing of actually analyzing it constantly. I learned how to write my own training programs. It became something totally different. And so I really started to look at things from a bird's eye view, not just from a physical, not just from a mental, but actually seeing how everything interrelated. And so it's like, it's very different progression as you get older because you become wiser and you just understand the bigger picture. Yeah.
And so you kind of kept taking steps further and further out from like being into it. It's cool. I think that I did memory training for a little while, which was an interesting road. But in studying the memory, and I would say that like learning any skill, whether it's javelin or playing the piano, learning any skill, it's a memory. It's a memory event. Like it's whether it's muscle memory or if you're trying to memorize the notes, it's all just accumulating knowledge and sorting it into like a systemized network that you can navigate when the time comes. And I think that like at the first you're just adding like little bricks to that framework, and then like over time those bricks become like bigger shapes, and you're like kind of moving it's bigger chunks, And so this is kind of like how I think of that stepping out, and getting further and further in your perception of what's happening. It's like you're viewing things from bigger chunks. So you're viewing the training program rather than the exercise that you're on, rather than the workout of the day. It's like how does it fit all into it? But that's interesting to hear.
I think people gloss over that too, because they say, well, it's all about balance. And it's like, okay, what are we balancing? And a lot of us, we don't realize that like there is a specific balance for specific tasks, for specific desires. And the balance isn't really looked at. We just say, we try and feel into this balance, but we don't actually think about it and like look at it in a week and really like spread it out and see like, okay, where is this coming from? And I think that that's a skill that needs to be taught a lot earlier. You have to be aware that you are filling out this map. And you are trying to figure out what it looks like for you as you're going along. You don't have to do it perfectly, but you do have to be aware that it's kind of being filled in as you learn. And I think I would have learned a lot faster had I approached it from that direction.
I've had conversations with people that are like you in some respect, and that they're into their thing, and so balance has come up in a few of these conversations. You want to live a balanced life, but it's almost like to get the high-level results in any field, you kind of have to be unbalanced for a while.
It's an ebb and a flow, right? It's a spiral. It's like a training cycle. During my seasons, like you train really hard, and then you take a month or two off, but like off. And high performance is not, a lot of the time, it's an obsession. It's getting caught up in a vortex. And it's a really juicy place to be, but it's not somewhere that's necessarily made for everyone. And you need different people in society to do different things. If everybody was just busy swirling into this vortex, like society would cease to function. And some people, but it's like everything has its price, right? Some people are really good at having that literal balance where everything is like an equal piece of the pie. And that's how they function best. And then there's other people where when my life is equally balanced, my life feels like chaos because nothing is getting attention. And you need people like me and you need people like them. So it's like if something's really not calling to you and you feel like it's really hard to fully dive into it past a certain degree of like pushing past some discomfort, then sometimes like that thing is not for you, or that energy style is not for you. And there's like, it's interesting when you get addicted to your lifestyle pattern in a way that's exciting.
Exactly. Explain to me that vortex as you describe it. Like when you're, and I've asked other people this question too, like when you're doing your thing, when you're throwing the javelin, like and you're fully into it, like fully obsessed. Like, what? I guess this is me just guessing as a non-Olympic athlete, but I would guess that like the event, like that, the throw in the finals would be like the epitome of the vortex. That's when you're like the most locked into it. It's is that a fair assumption? And then B, whatever that like, whenever you're the most locked in, what is that experience like? Like, is there a flow state or?
Yeah, the vortex is. I started calling when I wouldn't talk to anyone for 2 days, and I do nothing but like write and learn and figure out some kind of dance move, figure out something relative to javelin. But it would require me not talking to other people and not going out and doing a bunch of stuff. I call it often like an input diet, where like I wasn't reading, I wasn't listening to podcasts, I wasn't taking in any information. I was just trying to create.
Do you listen to music?
Yeah, but it's got to be kind of an energy thing. Yeah. It's not words. It can't be changing up and down. I'm pretty specific about playlists. So, for example, Ama Piano is really great because it's in another language and the rhythm is consistent. It's this really like Afro house kind of vibes. Yeah. And that helps me like dive in, but it has to be kind of inducing, like there's no external thoughts. And so it's in those vortex stages where it's like, it looks like you're doing nothing. Like it looks like you're not doing a lot, but you're solving for a lot. And then when you come out of it and you go practice, I can be throwing a javelin, being in the vortex and being deep dove into something and nothing around me is there. But then you need to practice coming out of it too. Yeah. And so it's not this state that you maintain for like weeks on end. It's something that's like, it's an intense energy and focus and you have to let it go sometimes. Yeah. So even like, in a major competition, you're in the vortex. You've prepared your whole day to be in the vortex at the competition in your own zone, despite the fact that everybody is around. Yeah. And then you come out of it again. And it's about being able to sometimes like breathe back and forth between those two states. Was that experience, like the competition experience, was that different earlier in your career versus towards the end of your career? Yeah. Yeah. Different things going on. Where do you pay attention to? Do you like hear the crowd? Do you hear do you have a game plan? Like, like when you're walking up, there's a line, right? You walk up to the line and throw from the line. Yeah, there's a lot going on. We're on the field for a long time, so it looks like we're throwing, and it's a fraction of a moment, but there's a lot going on for us just because we have to wait so long between competitors, which is an interesting game to wait, right? And to be good at waiting, and so. The older you get, the more you need warm up, and you need to make sure you're not cooling down, but you need to have high enough fitness that you can warm up every single time and it's not draining you, because explosive sports can drain you. And that's what I noticed in getting older was I couldn't just like walk around, crack my neck and throw a javelin again. I had to maintain a certain level of snappiness without overdoing it. Yeah. So it's a game of like being really in your body and being like, okay, what do I need? What little tuning in do I need to make to try and make this movement kind of snap correctly? Where am I missing it? And you're just playing with the game of feeling connections in your body. Yeah. And then when you get to the line, you can go and execute. So that's a really great way to stay focused, is literally stop thinking in words and start thinking in feelings. Yeah, I've thought about Aaron Rodgers, he's a quarterback. He was talking about that in his practice. It was like he drills until he fully feels it, and then in the games he's never like reading the defense and trying to understand like, oh, they're in this scheme and our offense is in this scheme and the mismatch should be over here. It's in the game time. All he has time to actually think about is feelings from previous drills. It's a choreography. Yeah. It's very interesting when you start understanding like connected series of movements. Yeah, it is cool. And I've noticed that too with martial arts. Like, something's off, there's always like a different point of focus. Like, oh, today my hips are a little behind the flow of things, and so I focus on them, get them right, and everything else will fall into line, whether it's the shoulders or whatever it is. But that's cool. What do you think about that? Okay, this is an interesting question. This is what I'm trying to figure out. So people, when they're giving advice, like coaches, or people are often teaching, they teach relative to what the thing that you're supposed to be doing should look like, what this yoga pose should look like, what the throw should look like, where your arm should be in space, a visual concept. And so we're constantly describing things based on how they look and where they are spatially organized. Yeah. And we think in visuals. The thing is, though, is that when you create an action, the goal is to know what this actually feels like. And so, for example, if you're throwing, right? Some people say it's a whip. Some people say it's a snap. Some people say it's a punch, right? And those are actually 3 different physical feelings.
Yeah.
If I say whip something, you're going to go like this. If I say snap something, you're going to get it even harder, right? If I say do it like it's a flowy ribbon, you're going to do something different again. And so people don't feel into these physical feelings. And then they have a really time finding the line. Because the line is just like how the energy is moving in that line. If you thought about something brightening up. And it's like the line is getting brighter when you're adding more emphasis to it. And so that's the way I think about movement a lot of the time, to try and find patterns like the one you were explaining in jiu-jitsu. But I find some people do this intuitively, but they don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
So are you one of those people who's really good at figuring out intuitively how that feels?
Yeah, it's like if I'm watching someone do a jiu-jitsu move, like I'm not really processing it visually. I'm like, oh, that guy's probably feeling this right now. Have you always played contact sports? No, it's actually relatively new for me.
Okay.
I started, baseball was always my main sport.
Okay.
Which honestly is probably similar to javelin in a lot of ways. It's got that rotational.
Very similar.
And that carried over to like throwing punches and stuff too. But yeah, I'd probably 3 or 4 years ago, I went to a Muay Thai gym just to try it out. And I got hooked in Muay Thai first and then got into other ones. But until then, it all been ball sports. So
did you feel more spatially aware once you started like interacting physically with people?
Yeah, definitely. It's and some of that, and honestly, that was always what I liked about ball sports. It was always like, but it wasn't like so obvious because it's not like if you're playing soccer or basketball, like you can kind of like feel the defense around you and feel the double team coming or feel the space opening up on the other side. But yeah, without like full contact, there's less feedback, so it was less.
Yeah.
It was less engaging mentally in that respect. But yeah, switching to a contact sport, it's super aware of the space.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Like I'm still relatively new in jiu-jitsu, so I don't know all the terminology. And I was rolling with a guy who's a black belt, and I asked him how he did a certain move, and it's called taking the back. He'd taken my back, and he was like, which time? Since he'd done it like 3 different times in the 10 minutes we were rolling. And I was like, oh, it was the one where we were over on that corner of the mat. And it was like I didn't have the terminology to like distinguish the techniques that were different of each of those times, but I knew exactly where it was. And he did too. So yeah, that's what I like about martial arts, and jiu-jitsu specifically, is like just very like ingrained in that space.
Yeah. I'm craving that.
Yeah.
It's like moving with an object is really interesting, but they're not conscious.
Yeah,
and like moving against a consciousness is a very interesting game to play.
I find it kind of addicting. It's like it's because you gotta. It's like, do you know that I know what you know?
Yeah.
And it's just playing that game forever.
It's like chess.
Yeah, exactly.
It's on my list of things to do for sure.
Yeah.
It's
and all the martial arts.
Yeah.
Definitely incorporate that, and ball sports too. But
yeah, throwing's important.
Yeah.
Throwing gives you the capacity to understand like the concept of energy transfer outside of your body.
Yes.
And it's like you have to start with light objects before you go to heavy objects. Heavy objects teach you things, but light objects help you refine it.
Yeah. How heavy is a javelin?
600 grams.
600 grams.
It's like a pound.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. For women. For men, it's a little more.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's a baseball bat. It's probably a little heavier.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's in ounces. So I don't.
Yeah. What's challenging about it is that like if you don't throw it straight through the point, if you deviate at all, it feels heavier.
Yeah, the energy is less efficient.
Yeah, and the ball, like you can rotate a ball and you can bring it through a spiral behind your back and then you can whip it off that spiral. Javelin is still a spiral. It's just a very long and narrow spiral. And it's like if you miss by a little, the energy is going to push out some other place in your body. And because the implement is heavy, you will feel it.
It's interesting to think about like physical energy and like, it's interesting how you brought that up with throwing, how throwing really makes you aware of like the energy transfer outside of your body.
With objects that stay in your hand, like a club, that's energy manipulation and recycling. Because you're trying to figure out how to extend it and then pretend to hit something or send it that direction and then pull it back into your body.
Yeah, there's the perfect balance. Like you're as much as you push, you have to pull.
Yeah, and it allows you to redo it over and over
Mm-hmm.
and practice an intention of where you're sending energy.
Yeah.
Throwing is actually committing to that intention.
It is cool. I've always been a thrower. Baseball is my sport, but
Yeah.
my shoulder is a little messed up now. But I still play. It's
More club work for you.
yeah. Honestly, I've been getting more into it, and hanging. I had one guy on, the shoulder guy.
Nice.
I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No, I think I've heard of this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he's Australian. I think maybe New Zealand. I always mix him up. I think he was Australian. But yeah, his thing was just hang.
Just hang, like a monkey.
Yeah.
Like we're evolved from.
Yeah, exactly.
Hanging led to throwing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you can throw yourself, you can throw other things.
Yeah.
That's still one of my goals, to throw myself from bar to bar and catch it.
Yeah, what's that called? I've done it from like short ones, but like little monkey bars. That's
Yeah. It's easy to practice when you're little and your spine just.
I know. I got on monkey bars like first time as an adult a few years ago.
Yeah.
I could not believe how hard it was. Like when I was a kid, there used a circle at my school, and we used to race around like laps and laps. And I was like struggling just to get across the one.
It's hard once you're heavy. You're supposed to learn it as you gain weight. Then swing for the rest of your life.
Yeah. All right, so we crossed paths initially at a Barefoot shoe event. I'm wearing the Vivo Barefoots now. I know
We're
you're
the originals.
Yeah. You're a rep for Vivo Barefoot, or you're ambassador for Vivo Barefoot, I think. And I've just what drew you into barefoot shoes? I've got my own story on it, but how did you get into that?
I was barefoot all summer.
You're barefoot all summer?
I was barefoot all summer. I was training barefoot. I was dancing barefoot. I was doing everything barefoot in my house.
And was this particular summer, was that different than previous summers? Like,
yeah, because I wasn't throwing javelin yet. I'd retired,
Okay.
and then I unretired, but I needed to do a certain type of training to figure out how to move energy through my body. And when we wear shoes, it blunts us against the ground.
Yeah.
And so shoes are great for producing more energy and for saving your feet when we do really incredible things. Like javelin shoes are super stiff. They got spikes in the bottom. And that's you working a shoe, but the shoe gives you something. It's giving you a stick to the ground. It's giving you safety. It's giving you the capacity to work the heck out of the ground.
Right.
But the shoe is also hard on the foot, and you pay for it in the way that you don't feel the ground. You're a little more blind to it, but it's okay because the shoe is protecting you, and you're willing to pay that price. But the problem is if you do that all the time and all your shoes protect you to some degree, then you're never actually understanding the ground and understanding where your weak spots are and where the shoes are compensating for you. And it would have really blinded me actually to my core and not being able to understand where I was in space, because your core is the engine, but your feet are anchors. And if the engine isn't anchored to something, then it's not going to go places very efficiently.
Yeah.
And it was really that thought of like, okay, well, the more finely tuned my engine is, the more I can work the ground with those shoes. But if the engine isn't finely tuned, then the shoes aren't going to do anything. It's kind of like when we imbue magical objects, right? Like anything. So like, oh, this hat does this, or like this wand has this magical capacity. A javelin is only magical if you have the skill to manipulate it. And so it's the same thing with shoes. The shoes are only magical and useful if you have the skill to manipulate it. And that has to be done, that work has to be done outside of working with that object a lot of the time in order to develop it in the first place.
Yeah.
So that was why I got into Vivo, because I was like, I need this in my life. My feet just didn't work properly, and now they do all kinds of nice, weird, and fluid motions. So it was really just supporting that.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. For me, I think about it a lot in terms of feedback. I think I even mentioned feedback already in this conversation, but yeah, it's like I drive a manual car, I wear the barefoot shoes. Like if there's an option with more feedback, that's the way I like it. And
I like that.
there's this concept of bottlenecks, right? So if you're pouring out a bottle of liquid, the bottleneck is the constraint, so you can only pour as fast as that bottleneck allows for. And I feel like the weak point in my system, the bottleneck in my athletic capabilities, was my feet. Like, and it was because like what you're saying, like I had these tools. I had been wearing shoes, which are great, running shoes with extra cushions so I could hit the ground hard running downhill, or cleats to help me grip the ground. But like because I'd never taken the time to train barefoot, I never like really understood the context of those tools. I was never able to like fully understand what are these tools allow me to do, since that was kind of the standard, and I hadn't like
You didn't have the
set
foundation.
yeah, exactly. I hadn't like set the kind of the control group with my barefoot training, and then run the experiments from there.
Yeah.
And then do those kinds of thoughts carry over into the rest of your training style? Are you always kind of looking for different training techniques that give you that sort of what I'm calling feedback?
Yeah, the feedback and like, again, the bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Like, what's the most important thing? If I did nothing else, what's the thing that's stopping everything else from moving forward?
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be taken to perfection, but it needs, like, it's the thing that just needs to catch up to everything else.
Yeah, if you just get it up to like the average, then that's going to increase your results more than taking what you're already good at and making that, spending the same amount of time trying to make that better.
Yeah, and there's a point when you specialize, when you do that with a thing, with anything, right? Like, you got to choose at some points. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, depending on how deeply I want to go into this, the bottom just needs to be balanced for that thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, you have to lift a certain amount with javelin, so to speak, or you have to do some kind of weight training or something that is weighted in your body. Yeah. And it's like, okay, what's the ratio for that? And there's a lot of like contention between you have to lift really heavy or really often, or I don't think you have to lift at all to a certain degree, or you can change the way you lift. Yeah. So everybody's got a different style, and I love that idea of like, okay, like, what's the balance? Yeah. For that thing again.
Right. So, what are you going towards now? Now that your javelin is no longer as primary a focus, like, what are you hoping to take what you've learned from javelin and transform that into? Are you looking into coaching javelin? Are you looking no?
No, not right now. Javelin is specific.
Yeah.
What I've been doing for the last year and a half is about figuring out how to teach athletes how to tap into the full spectrum of their athleticism, which is something that I didn't do for a long time. And so as part of my plan, I've been spending the last year and a half.
Real quick, can you explain, what do you mean by full spectrum? That's an interesting term.
For example, people always told me that I was unathletic. Like, the joke is Liz is very good at throwing javelin, but she's unathletic and clumsy.
Gotcha.
And it's like, I do one of the most technical sports in track and field. I'm not physically stupid. And there was but I'd kind of taken on these beliefs that I was going to trip over my own 2 feet, that I was going to hurt myself jumping, that I couldn't run well, so I shouldn't. Just certain things that really stopped me, like conversations, comments from people, what I believed with myself. It was this big thing about why can I do this thing, but I can't do these other things? That doesn't make sense. And many people have said something to me along the lines of, you should have thrown a lot further. Like, you could be the world record holder and you're not. Why are you not? And I was like, I don't know. And I was like, I have everything I need, yet for some reason I'm not doing this thing. I'm not figuring it out. And I realized it was because I didn't understand. I was paying attention to so many visual cues, and I didn't understand my internal body. And so when I started to dance, I actually started to understand, like, oh, if you go like this, the body will follow. There's a fascial connection. And that's the exact same thing as javelin. Yeah. But I didn't understand it in this full range of different motions, and I didn't understand gravity, and I didn't understand momentum, and I didn't understand feeling into those specific things, no matter the task. And I created this list of things. I was like, okay, if I was going to break down javelin into dance moves, what are these components? What do I need to understand? And it's like, I need to have this component. I need to have a rotational component. I need to have a slight backbend component. Like, these are all movements, right? Like, doing this, like, these are all motions that are inherent in javelin. And yet I wasn't dancing them. I wasn't going into the technique until I felt it, until it was part of my bones. And it's because we often teach things as choreography, and we don't teach them as individual, like, movements. It's kind of like teaching someone to read by saying, just look at this word, and then that word, and then that word, versus here's the letter. And that's why I came back for another Olympics, was I spent all this time before this summer feeling into how to feel these lines across my body, what the basic dance moves were, how the spinal engine worked, how that connected to the ground, how your hands are fascia and information that, like, they create intention. That's why we speak with our hands, because they tell us where we're going. And if I move everything relative to my hand and I let the hand lead everything I do, it becomes very intuitive about where my body should follow, and I don't even need to think about it. Yeah. So that was the whole idea. It was like, I want to come back to teach people these things that I learned way too late in my career. And it wasn't because I wasn't a good athlete. It wasn't because I didn't have the capacity. It was because I was having trouble learning words from people when I should have learned letters. Mm-hmm. And it's just not something that's in our culture. In Vancouver culture, for example, there is not really a dance culture. And so people only develop physical literacy in terms of sport a lot of the time. Or if they're doing dance as a sport, like as a hobby. Mm-hmm. And I want more people to have access to this capacity to move through this, and especially athletes. So that's what I'm doing in my retirement. I'm creating courses, I'm going on podcasts. Mm-hmm. I'm going to write a book, but I want to create courses first so that people have access to it first, and then it funds the book so I can give more and more information. So that's kind of always been the goal. So when I retired, it wasn't like, I don't know what I'm doing next. It was a part of a larger plan because I wanted to test it myself first. Because I believe in, here's one of my values, I believe in putting your money where your mouth is. And to come out of retirement to try and make a fourth Olympics, like that's a pretty, and to do it from a system that was completely different, that takes some stick-with-itness. And it's like, I know what works and I know what doesn't work. I know where I could have done better, and I know where I could have used old ways of training with a new way of what I was doing stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, if I do this and I fully commit to it, then what I'm saying is actually a value, and I will believe what I am saying. Mm-hmm. So that was the thing. I tested out how to do backflips, how to dance, how to run, how to actually jump on things properly. And I totally changed the way I moved in a year and a half by thinking differently about the movement.
And how did that change your performance in javelin?
It did. I understand the throw now. Yeah. In a very different way than I ever did. And I kept having foot injuries, unfortunately. I had an Achilles injury. Because I learned how to jump, and I'd never jumped that way before, and I actually learned how to use my arms, and it was like I was on a pogo stick. And then my calves had never been used that way before, and I got spasms in both my calves, and my Achilles were aching for months. So I couldn't run for a lot of this time. And I still threw after that, and I had a quick groin sprain 8 weeks out from nationals, and I still threw 61 meters. Hadn't lifted in 2 years. Hadn't ran all year. All I did was dance, basically, and I threw something that is a very well-recognized, quality throw. Yeah. And even though I wanted to throw 64 meters. I wanted to throw the auto qualifier, and I wanted to break my own Canadian record. Mm-hmm. But I think the reality is that I did need some more classic training under my belt that I just could not get to with the injuries that I had. Yeah. And there are ways to prevent those injuries, which I could have spent more time doing. But I was so excited to do all this other stuff that I made a choice. And I was like, okay, I could go back to everything I was doing before, but I'm not done figuring out the choreography of the dance move of the javelin throw. Mm-hmm. I was like, I will finish doing this. I might not have a solid grasp on it, but I will have it. Mm-hmm. And I did have it, so yeah.
Super cool. Have you always kind of had this teaching approach? No?
I just figured this out a year and a half ago. Yeah. It kind of just came to me. Yeah. I was writing a book about high performance habits initially and how to stack them in balance. So don't do your diet down to the T, counting every single gram of your food if you don't have protein and carbs immediately after your workout, if you're not hydrated. If, that right there is the very first thing. If this is a solid staple in your life and you're an athlete and you have that post-workout nutrition down, it makes a really big difference, especially for women. Mm-hmm. But some people are spending so long in nutrition, this supplement, time-restricted eating, this, that, absolutely, it's all good. It can all make a difference. But your sleep is shit, well, it doesn't matter. So it's what's the 80-20 of all of these major things that you should have in place before moving up to the next phase of it? Mm-hmm. And kind of making sure that you're building this really solid foundation. Because if your mental habits are shit, or your routines are not great, or you don't have a good grasp of your emotions, or your social circle is completely devastated and you're disconnected, you can only build as high as the pillar that is weakest. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of just making sure that things are in balance. And sometimes these pillars need to be built a little higher and these ones are a little lower, because that's the balance. But it's always making sure that you're kind of building up in this way.
And do you think through your own training you've improved your own abilities to see and understand these different pillars and kind of identify the weak points in your foundation? And now, like, as you've developed that ability, now you're kind of getting to the point where you can do that for others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. So I have some concepts about how daily wins work and how they create motivation and how to actually sustain motivation in something.
Mm-hmm.
And I have systems and practices for that. I teach people about the concept of routines and how to actually optimize
Mm-hmm.
and how to work that in. And I've done online events for years, like teaching this to like tech companies, basically.
Are a
Airbnb.
lot of your clients tech people? Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
And are they
yeah.
tech people, but is there a physical focus, or are you just taking the skills you've learned in your physical pursuits and...
It's both.
Okay.
It's how to refine to
Interesting.
make your energy go into doing something at a really high capacity and quality.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you refine your focus? How do you figure out what you want? How do you stay on task? How do you actually get excited about learning something new when you're absolutely shit at it?
Yeah.
And fall in love. People will say fall in love with the process. And it's like, yes, but how do you fall in love with the process?
Mm-hmm.
You gamify it. And so everything I do is gamified to a degree to push something forward.
What types of gamification? Like scorecards or checklists or...
Checklist, my favorite gamification is, do you know what confirmation bias is?
Yeah.
Okay. So whatever we believe, we see more of.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you buy a car and then you see that car everywhere. Everybody has the same bloody car. But it's also for what we believe about our life. And if you believe life is interesting and there's many interesting conversations to be had,
Mm-hmm.
and that you are going to find those interesting conversations, all of a sudden you start making choices and seeing opportunities to have interesting conversations. And then you follow that path, and then you make a podcast about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do more of that. And then you're like, oh, I don't really want to do this right now. I'm going to take a break. And you stop seeking out those times, and you actually
Mm-hmm.
have introspective times. And you've just switched your confirmation bias. And the thing that you actually want the most is going to appear before you. So that's one way to think, okay, I better be really clear about what I would like to see more of and what problem I would like to solve. And so the problem I wanted to solve was how do I become like a fearless mover? What do I need to learn to move with like this animal-like capacity and grace? And then things kept appearing before me. And it was like, and I'd get really excited about something when it was the right time.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I wanted to fight. I knew I wanted to box. And I remember one day I woke up and I was moving around and I like went like this, and I was like, I'm going to the boxing gym tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I just like ordered stuff and like went. Mm-hmm. And then I started to learn at the right time. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of like this feeling of playing the game of the gifts and of synchronicities. But it's not really synchronicities. It's like, do you notice how fast you've started to accelerate something? And so I'd write it down on a calendar. So it's like, okay, I learned this new skill today. I learned that new skill today. I found out this about my body. I understood this about dance. So-and-so invited me to this event. I noticed this on the wall in an advertisement, and I think I'm going to buy it. And you start noticing how everything is adding up to send you in that direction. And what becomes really fun is that we don't realize if we don't write things down, if you don't see it physically accumulate on a calendar, then you're not going to be as sensitive to more of it. It's a resensitization for where you are going. And whenever something really cool happened that felt like really synchronistic, and like I'm like, oh, I wanted to go dancing. Someone invites me out the next night. Mm-hmm. It's like I put like a star on the calendar, being like, that feels like not an accident. Mm-hmm. Like something switched here, and that's when you know you're actually creating your reality.
Yeah. And
that is a very fun game to play. Whether you're doing it with a physical maneuver, or you're going after something that's an experience, or you want to be more of a certain type of a person and you're looking for proof, then that is a really, really interesting game to play.
Mm-hmm. It's I was just talking about this with one of my buddies. Like, I just did a week of jiu-jitsu on Nanaima there.
Cool.
And I had a shoulder issue. I did a 90-day muscle-up challenge, which was fun, but I did a high volume for like a lot of days in a row. And
what do you get up to?
Most of them were assisted. I can do them unassisted on the rings, but I was trying to average 45 a day, so it was like 4,095 in 90 days.
Jesus.
Yeah, so
all
high
right.
volume. But anyways, it felt great, and my shoulders were just like accumulating more and more tension.
Yeah.
And then I finally got to the day 90 and took a break for a week, and my shoulder started hurting. Like it hadn't been bothering me, but I think like once it had time to kind of like reassess So anyways, my shoulder was feeling pretty bad, and so I went into this week of jiu-jitsu like not really sure how it was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a little crystal in my car that my buddy gave me, and so I use it to set intentions, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to try to maintain or improve my alignment this week.
Nice.
Set the intention for health and safety. But because of that, I ended up like with all these little lessons learned throughout my week of training at this gym. And I felt like my alignment improved more in the last week than it had in the last couple years combined. And it was because like I'd set the intention kind of, as you're describing it, I like made myself prone to this confirmation bias. And so anytime an input was coming in, and then it kind of culminated in the last session of the week. I went with the head coach. The reason I'd gone there, it was my first time I'd sparred with him. And he had this one, and his whole system is built out through alignment. I really like his system. I went to Nanaimo to train his system because it's all alignment based, and that's what makes sense to me. But he has this really high level understanding of alignment, and I swear it took us a couple minutes to kind of feel each other out, and then at one point he just put his shoulder into my chest and like drove me into the ground, and like everything in my shoulder clicked into place. It all popped, and I swear like his understanding of alignment, like he'd intuitively felt my misalignment and had like isolated it. And
interesting,
because I'd kind of been practicing all week, at my body right in that moment was like ready to let him make that adjustment. And woke up the next day and my shoulder felt better than it has in a long time. But it gets back to what you're saying of like kind of reflecting on where you're at and setting the intention for where to go.
Yeah.
It sets you up for these sort of lucky occurrences to accelerate your progress along that path.
Yeah, especially with setting intentions like that for physical learning. It's like, what lens do I want to learn through today?
Yeah.
And it's surrounding a problem. It's surrounding it with every single way of understanding, of intensity, of alignment, of like consciousness, of presence, of whatever, right? Like of being open to new things, of drilling down one thing. Yeah. It's quite interesting when you start learning that way.
Yeah, and it gets back into the feeling. Like it's, to try to tie a couple things together we're talking about. Like we've got these little bricks that are information we're memorizing, and as we get deeper into something, these bricks become bigger chunks of information, right? So rather than looking at the bricks, we're looking at, oh, here's a wall, there's a door, there's, you know, that's a bathroom. So it's rather than building each individual brick, once you can start building them.
I like to think of it as like the first time you learn something, you're in explore mode.
Yeah.
Like 1, explore. 2 is groove. You find something that you've been exploring and you groove it in, and you just try and like learn about it, and then you kind of like test it out a little bit. So you do one thing and then you test out another version of just this one thing. And then you play expand. So explore, groove, and expand. And expand is you take whatever this thing is and you add something else to it. Something that you've already learned, something that you want to play to. Maybe you want to level up and just kind of add some complexity to it or some nuance, or you want to do it at a different rhythm. And that's when, and then you can go intensity. Intensity is the next one. So now you go up in the intensity just to see if you can do that, but harder, and if you can handle more force within that system that you've created. And then you go back to explore again. And it's like when you do that, you start to build the pyramid. But it does need that, like, okay, I'm open. Okay, what is this? Okay, I kind of get it. Okay, let's see if I can try this. Oh, okay, I think I got it. It's like, okay, let's do that, but harder. And then it's like, once you can do it harder and a little better, then you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think there's often parallels with evolution, right? And so there's just sort of the random mutations, and that's kind of the parallel to what you're describing as these explorations. So you're building on, and then all of a sudden it's, oh, let me go check out if there's different types of mortar I can use, and then you go find something that works, and you can start stacking more bricks on with that. But yeah, it's the same in evolution. It's a random mutation, and either it works or it doesn't, and it either goes further into that direction, or it goes back to.
Yeah, and it's good to keep track of what you're staying on, like what lines you're following. Yeah. But it's it's interesting.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm jealous of your hip capacity right now. I'm like trying to.
My hips are, they can externally rotate really well.
Wow, congratulations. I'm not one of those people. Track, been forward like this my whole life. Needs to.
Well, there's advantages and disadvantages to it.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I got some labrum
Oh, okay.
issues with this one.
Now I'm just like, I'm seeing that. I'm like, yeah, we're going to be stretching here.
What's your training routine like these days? Like, and has it been difficult for you to train without like an Olympic Games to, no?
I love moving.
Yeah.
I love figuring out how to move. Everything is a dance move, basically.
Gotcha.
Everything can be broken down into some form of dance move.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty fun to think of things that way. So I was running just because I wanted to get my running up so I could have more capacity, because like I understand this cross-body like X connection really well now, and it kind of just becomes like this engine like spinning back and forth in the middle of my body that like externally produces that energy. But then I injured my foot. And I was like, the universe is telling me I need to rest a little. So I've just been doing a lot more yoga, like hip mobilization, like just moving fluidly and just giving my body a chance to not be explosive, which is agony to me. I love being explosive, but high intensity energy, like everything needs to be cycled through. And I think my body just keeps telling me like, hey, you've been functioning up here for too long. You need to come back down to this because you have changed. Now that you've produced more power, you're producing more power than you are graceful or efficient movement. You've exceeded your capacity. So you need to come back to this stuff. And it's kind of like you always have to go between those two things. And where people get injured is when their power exceeds their grace. So I think that's where I'm kind of at right now, is an emphasis on fluidity and kind of just getting some stuck things moving a little bit better before I go back to something intense.
I call my own training fight and flight conditioning. So there's running and then martial arts training. And I kind of experience what you do, where I get really into running and I'll do that for a while, and then all of a sudden like my Achilles or something will just tighten up and then it's just popping out. I've been running, but and so then it becomes less fun, and then I shift to the other side. I'll get more into the martial arts side and do that for a while, and then I start getting. But do you think it has to be like that, where you kind of like go until it starts to break down and then you shift your focus to something else? Or do you think, since I've always tried to be like, maybe I could just like slowly overload a sustainable level rather than like doing unsustainable levels and then having to stop and do something else to an unsustainable level, stop, do something else?
I think you need to spend more time in technique.
More time and technique.
Running is, you do not run to get fit. You get fit to run. The way I run, because I'm so strong, is that I don't do low intensity tempo, because it makes certain parts of my body not turn on. And so my core isn't turned on, and then I'm not creating these cross body connections. But if you go a little more intensely sometimes, then you can't sustain it for as long, but you can feel all the connections in your body.
Okay.
Everything becomes dim when you do it at a lower intensity. And so like, it's easier to feel things at higher intensity, but if you don't have enough grace to handle that intensity, then you get injured.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit more of a fluctuation. So I think when it's not run until something really hurts, it's tap back into, instead of running hard or running for time or running for pace or running for whatever, be like, can I feel this run and make it as beautiful and as graceful as possible? Do I feel the connection in my feet? Like, do not lose a single moment where you're trying to focus on intensity. Like, your focus should be purely on how connected does this feel? How aligned does this feel? Do I feel like I'm taking use of momentum and gravity and my skeleton and my head over foot? Am I doing these things? And when you shift to that thing, sometimes you have to slow down a bit, and it's not quite as fun because you can't go full intensity, but it gives you that capacity to handle a higher intensity. And it's part of being an athlete is knowing when to hold back a little bit. And it's understanding where you are at and respecting that you're not good enough or fit enough to handle a certain degree of something yet. And it's humbling every time, because like, you're flirting with the line. You're always flirting with the line. But the trick is to don't flirt with 100%, flirt with 95% or even 80%. And I always say, like, if I'm doing something at 80% technique, then that's the line. And the more intense it goes, it's closer to like 85 or 90%.
Gotcha.
My technique never falls below that point. Anytime it does, I have to slow down or I have to take a pause. And then I can come back to it, but I'm never losing that technique line.
Yeah, since at that point, you're basically reinforcing sloppy technique.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like, I realistically did that with my feet. Whereas sometimes I just push a little too hard because I'm like, come on, right? And it's wishful thinking, and I had a deadline. I don't have deadlines now.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really nice sometimes about not having deadlines and not necessarily being professional or having a lot of time is it will be ready when it is ready. And even having that mindset, it'll probably be ready faster anyway. So I think that that's what it is. It's like you do have to sit through a little bit more discomfort of being annoyed that you're not doing something to the full expression you would like to do it in because you have to focus in on technique.
Do you miss anything without the deadlines? Is there a lack of any accountability issues or motivation issues? No.
No, I love it. I love being in my body.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the great pleasures of being human is figuring out what your body can do and having a certain control over it. Because the more one you are with your body, the more you understand yourself and your limitations and your capacities. And I see people now and they don't speak with their hands very much. They don't around here. And that's because people don't have good control over their arms because they're constantly sitting here or here or here and they're not really doing anything with their body and they don't move through space really nicely. And so it's like, that to me is incredibly fascinating. I'll spend hours on that, just trying to figure out how to dance or how to throw something or how to manipulate something, how to hold something heavy, how to hold something lightly, how to throw a piece of fabric off my arm. And that's, to be able to do all of those things gives me this huge range of nuance in communication in my capacity being human. And I think the better you're understood or the better you can express yourself so everyone understands you, then you really actually start to inhabit your body and be more of a human.
So is that what you would say is your core driving force is being the most human that you can be?
Have the most full human experience you can have. And that involves mastering your physical form or having your physical form be highly tuned in to whatever it is you care about. And if that's a highly intellectual process, then your body needs to be aligned and straight and moving well to facilitate your spinal cord having all the information that it can possibly have and having good blood flow and having oxygen supply. So you form your body for that. Everything can be done to enhance aspects of humanity. So it's kind of you don't need to do what everybody else is doing. You need to do what allows you to tap into your gifts.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you always kind of felt that way, or has that sort of been the perspective you've built?
Perspective I've built over the last year and a half.
Yeah.
It's like a video game character, right? And different video game characters have different swaggers. They move differently. They have different outfits. And you can look at them and you can assume a lot about who they are simply by the way they look and the way they move, because they become finely honed. They have their signature move. They have whatever, right? And so when you think about your video game character, it's okay, so or me, right? Okay, I'm Liz, who no longer throws javelin, but I want to be a speaker, and I love movement. And I want to be able to run around up a flight of steps like I'm in a video game. It looks like I'm bouncing up the steps. I want to have a capacity like the creatures in Avatar. That to me is a really exciting way to move, and that would be a very dynamic, very sensitive, very aware person. And that's who I aspire to be on the whole. And that's how that movement would match it. And so it's when you start playing that game as well, movement again becomes more interesting because it's not just about jiu-jitsu. It's not just about beating others. It's, okay, how does that character move when they're eating? How does that character move when they're interacting with someone? How does that character talk when they're having a conversation? How are they present? How are they not present? What lights them up? And how is that represented in their body? So that's kind of what's really interesting. When you do that, you tap into the peak performance for what that character can do. And then you get to experience again the depth of being very, very human.
Yeah. It's definitely, I'm definitely getting the sense that it's it's about the journey, not the destination. It's not about being able to win the jiu-jitsu match. It's about being able to use your fork to to eat like a jiu-jitsu player would, or it's
Yeah.
to walk with the cadence of.
And you have side quests to test those things.
Yeah.
You've accumulated these skills, and now you have a side quest, and it's just a good time to like test out where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's all a game.
Yeah. And so when you do get to the destination, like, what was your biggest accomplishment in javelin? Was it the Canadian record?
I'd say it's having the capacity to think about one thing for 20 years.
Well, and let's get back to that. But like, what was the
Like, what is the actual physical
the biggest
result?
the resume item? What's the most impressive resume item from your career?
Yeah, I guess the Canadian record. It was thrown in Japan. I think maybe winning Pan Ams in 2015.
Okay.
That was really cool. I came back from I was leading the whole competition, and I was 3 behind at the very last throw. So I was in third. I got knocked out. And it was in Toronto, and it was the only event going on. And I had the last throw of the competition because I had been leading up until the final round. And then I remember I visualized this moment. And instead of being nervous, I knew that I'd already won.
That's cool.
And it was like the hair went back on my neck, and I just started like getting people going to get the clock going in the stadium. And I knew that a lot of Canadians were watching it from all over. And I knew it was on TV, and I could feel that I had this insane amount of energy like coming towards me. And there was a 60-kilometer-an-hour headwind.
That's wow.
Yeah. And I ended up throwing like 62 meters high to win the competition. And it was an incredible throw. Like, I knew when it left my hand, like, it was probably a personal best throw that had been beaten back by the wind.
Yeah.
But it won the competition, and like, the crowd went wild. And I remember thinking, I have been here before. Like, I have felt this energy.
Yeah.
I have like manifested this. And it was cool to compete really well and to feel into people's energy like that. And I feel like a solo sport it's not a solo sport when you do it right. It's a team sport. It's a spectator sport, which means people are giving you their energy.
Yeah. And so I'm curious about two things. Like, what did that moment when you saw the result, when you saw the javelin land, or you saw the number pop up on the board? I'm curious what it feels like in that moment, and then I'm curious, like, the next day when you wake up, do you feel different? Do you feel like, oh,
It's a side quest thing.
Side quest
right?
thing.
It's like, okay, I've been working towards this, and this was the proof. I knew the capacity was in my body, but I hadn't proved it to myself and others. I haven't, like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a proof of confidence, a proof of concept. And it's like, you realize, like, you are that thing, and everybody else knows it too. So it has been witnessed. So you know that you've achieved the level up.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's interesting. It's like the days after, it's the feeling of you don't need a witness. You are it. And the witness helps you accept the level up, but you can also accept it yourself every single day.
Yeah. You already knew. Like, it's just now it's sort of some sort of relief that there's others can know too, or
it's nice.
It's nice.
But like, I've thrown further than my personal best by a lot, and very few people have witnessed that.
What is it? So that's interesting. So let's say you set your personal best on a practice field, and you know that you just,
or you fouled something by like an inch, and it's like, okay, it's there.
Yeah.
It is there, and is that enough for me to know that I have leveled up? And my best throw it was a foul by an inch, and it was significantly higher than my personal best. And I remember thinking, I wrote that program. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like, I think I've been writing my program for like a year and a bit. And I did it. And I thought, I know my stuff. And I finally really knew it. And like, that to me was worth a lot. And it made me trust myself. It made me trust myself to make really big decisions. And that was the coolest part about it. It was that feeling like, no one can take this from me, because now I can do whatever the hell I want.
That's kind of what I was looking for. It's like, it's interesting how, like, I don't know, I feel like it's pretty rare that you realize you can do something in in the heat of the moment. You know, it's usually comes outside of that, and then you live up to it or you don't in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
But I always felt like, and I've always been the type where when there's a game, when it's a big game, playoff game or whatever, like I always tend to play my best. But it's the moments leading up to that where I like build my confidence in my abilities, and so it's interesting.
Good conversation, by the way.
Yeah, I'm all pretty off the cuff. It's
Good.
kind of jumps all around, but I like to dive into the abstractions. And this is the thing. Like I won't really ask like what are your values, but I feel like they kind of come through. Yeah, that's how I try to finagle.
Finagle. That's a good word. That's one of my favorite words. We use finagling something.
Yeah.
Okay. Like just fucking with a little. Like.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Those are the main things I was really curious about. Do you feel proud to be an Olympian? Is that like you got the tattoo on your arm?
Yeah, got that 12 years ago.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I have a tattoo on the underside of my arm, on the pinky side of my left arm. And I got it there, and to a lot of people it looks upside down.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not upside down, it's for me. And people get tattoos, and I always warn people when they get their Olympic tattoo that if you get it somewhere really obvious, people will have a concept of you before they've even met you. And so when I shake someone's hand, you cannot see my tattoo. If I'm standing just in front of you, you don't see my tattoo. And even if my arms are down, it's kind of a little bit in towards my side. And I move my arm around, people can see it, but it's really for me.
Yeah.
And it was like, again, making my first Olympics was this feeling that I had to give up a lot, but I realized that if you wholeheartedly committed to something, you could do something really cool and you could have a really interesting human experience. And when I meet other Olympians, there's this commitment to having an interesting human experience. And that's what I really, really like about people. And some people prove it in Olympics. Some people just live their lives and have interesting experiences. But that was this feeling of like, I like the way I'm doing this life. And that's what it kind of means to me is, you know, we only have a certain amount of time to enjoy our time here. And maybe there's multiple lives. Maybe this is just the only one. But it's a hell of a ride if you actually dive into it fully.
Yeah. So it's a part of you, but it's not you.
No, it's just kind of it just represents a mindset at a certain point, and that mindset has shifted and grown a lot. But it is a certain willingness that is interesting.
Yeah.